Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? Yes? Excellent. I hope you've had a good week here in London, and it's been very interesting and of benefit to you. I'm going to talk to you very briefly about work that we've been developing with the UK BIM Alliance around data for asset management and operation. Now, you'll see that my name is there in brackets. I'm not Nick Tune. This is me with that. Well, that's me a little younger, shorter hair. I've been part of the project that Nick has been leading for the UK BIM Alliance. I've also been involved in other projects with the UK BIM Alliance. So this is one of two projects that are so far have been published on the BIM Alliance website. Nick is a digital engineering director at Atkins. But what I will say is that this project has been led by Nick, but is actually a collaboration of lots of organisations. It was initiated earlier in the year. It's been turned around very quickly, and the BIM Alliance is very proud to be able to launch it. So what's the problem that we are seeking to resolve? It's quite a serious one, actually, and quite a complicated one, and it's around the requirement for data. We now have the ability to access a lot of data about a construction project, whether it's vertical or horizontal, whether it's refurbishment or new build or alteration. But the problem is that we have clients that want this data but don't know how to express how they want it, or indeed are perhaps not quite sure exactly what the data is that they want or what they're going to do with it. So the problem is this desire to get hold of data, coupled with really a very broad and inconsistent client base. And lots of clients are not in the business of construction. Lots of clients are in other businesses altogether, and construction can be a very disruptive process that is an inconvenience in some ways. So what we need to do is to be able to give organisations the tools to enable them to take control. Now, that's not only giving clients the tools to take control, but it's also giving responding organisations that are involved in the delivery of data the ability to understand what's being asked for and how that information might be provided. So there needs to be some form of structured leadership, and there needs to be some clarity over requirements. So we have a number of questions to think about, very common sense questions. And I think what I would say is that all of this project and all of the work that we're doing with the UK BIM Alliance is very much around common sense. So the questions, what information does the client want? And what do they need? Because want and need are two very, very different things. The key thing is, why do they need that information? What are they going to be able to do with it? And that's important to understand from a delivery point of view, because you need to understand the context in which it's going to be used. And then the last point is, what is their expectation? Now, you'll know that we've been working with the adoption of BIM Level 2 in the UK for a long time now. And there are a number of guidance or materials that allow us to work out some of the answers to those questions. I think we probably start off with BS 1192 Part 4, which was introduced in 2014, and it works in conjunction with the COBE template, the COBE spreadsheet that the UK has adopted for the structure of asset data. And what that BS does is it takes the reader through thinking about considerations when requesting for data, and also starting to touch upon some of the commercial aspects that need consideration as well. But I always say that, and you may disagree, and I always say that COBE is a little bit of a complicated beast, and it takes a lot to get your head around it. Now, if you know it, you'll probably think very differently, but when you're starting from scratch, it's an interesting concept to understand. So that guidance is helpful in itself, but also raises a number of questions. Now, the other bit of guidance that we need to look at as well is a companion document, PAS 1192 Part 3, which again was introduced in 2014. And what that starts to do is structure really requirements for getting data out of a construction project and into the asset management arena. And what it tells us, particularly around the authoring of asset information requirements, which is the key document that's really going to be there to give clarity and direction. It says we need to think about legal issues, we need to think about commercial issues, financial issues, technical and managerial issues. And actually, when you look at COBE, it picks up on all of those things, but it's maybe not quite obvious. And then a document that's very dear to our hearts in the UK is PAS 1192 Part 2, which was the first guide that was launched to tell us how to manage data and information. Now, this introduces a very important concept that the whole supply chain contributes to information as a project progresses. Now, our focus has been very heavily on how that project progresses through design and into construction. And now we need to think about, and arguably this should have been our first thought, not our last thought or a following thought, but we need to think about how we get that data from design and construction into operation, because after all, the construction lifespan is very, very short when we think around about the whole operational lifespan of an asset. Now, it also introduces, when it looks at this concept of flowing and structured information exchange, it introduces the concept of plain language questions. Now, plain language questions appear quite heavily throughout all of the guidance, and also around the soft landings guidance as well. And they fill a number of purposes. They're there to convey the client's need for data and information. They're there for the delivery team to work out the best way of responding to that need. And they're also there to provide an audit trail, if you like, around design and construction so that performance in operation can be tracked and becomes more predictable. So this exchange of information is absolutely central to the success of the information modelling regime. And we need to remember as well that it's not just an exchange of data, but it's an exchange of files that will convey data, files that will be model-related files containing data around model components, and also files that are documents. I mentioned earlier that there's quite a big difference really behind client expectation and client need and request. So when I said at the very beginning that there's a desire for data, very often we'll see in documentation a request for COBE data and nothing very much more. But also very often, sitting in the back of organisations or individuals' minds is the aspiration to get digital visual models containing all of the data and information that they want to receive to help them to operate and maintain their buildings. Now, that's not an unreasonable aspiration, but there has to be a very clear distinction between what is needed and what you're aspiring to achieve. That needs to be communicated to the people that are actually going to be helping you to get that. It does put the project team in a quandary, because when we look at this diagram that starts to play out how that data might be provided, it says that really all the employer needs to do is confirm the purpose behind the data. Now, that's not true, and when we look at other documents, we know that that's not true. Part of the employer requirement is around the purpose. But it very clearly puts the information provider is there and taking a lot of the actions around the delivery of that information, and is also there to fix the issues as well. So as an information provider, and certainly one in the UK where we've gone from the history of handing over physical or digital documentation to now being able to deal with data and to fix all of the issues around data. That's an interesting change in working. So this project that the UK BIM Alliance has developed and Nick has led has all been about giving clients the ability to take control and to be clear in what they need. So you can get to this information by going to the UK BIM Alliance website, and if you select resources, it will take you to this project page, or select this particular project, it will take you to this project page, and you'll be able to see two sources of guidance. One is a static PDF guide, and the other one is a data matrix, and I'm going to go through those in a little bit more information now. So the guide, all common sense, picking up on a number of activities and making 5 recommendations, and I'm going to run through each of those recommendations over the next few minutes. One of the things it does is it works in conjunction with those standards that I mentioned earlier, and one of the first things it does was it says, okay, well, what is the purpose behind this data? And it takes you back to BS 1192 Part 4. Now, the reason for identifying purposes is really important for both the client and the supplier. It gives the client, it checks that the client really does understand what they're asking for, but for the supplier, it gives them visibility over how their data is going to be used. So they've got an idea of concept, and they can get a degree of confidence over what's going to happen to all of that data that they provide. Now, this is not necessarily about protecting the data. It's making sure that it is provided in context. Obviously, there is effort to the provision of data. It doesn't just exist, it doesn't just generate itself. So therefore there's effort, there's time, and there's knowledge, and very often that tends to equate to cost. So it's worth really concentrating on what data do we need and actually why do we need it. And the plain language questions that I mentioned earlier, the guide includes a number of plain language questions that you might want to consider including in asset information requirements or employees information requirements. And they're there to serve 3 purposes. They're there to make sure that the design and construction team have got some further clarity, have got some more guidance over the context, and they can understand the requirements. But they're also there as a check against that client, against the employee that's asking for the information, just to make sure that they are comprehensive in their requirement. And then they're there to make sure that the correct data is collected and it is also complete data. So going back to the provision of information, we know that that data might be provided in or that information exchange or the response to that plain language question might be provided through documentation, through data, and or through models as well. So the key recommendation, number 1, just thinking about the data element of that exchange, is make sure that if you understand your asset management software, if you've got systems in place, make sure that you understand how they're going to interface with data that comes through via COBie, because there needs to be a plan to get data from A to B. So it's worth understanding the fields that are in COBie and the fields that are in your asset management system and how they relate to one another. And then the second key recommendation, when we look at COBie, and we'll go through the different sheets, the different tabs, it takes us very neatly through a construction, developing in degrees of detail as you go through each tab. But one of those tabs is attributes. So we've gone through understanding spaces, we've gone through understanding types, we've gone through understanding components, and at some point we get to a tab that is attributes. Now, what are attributes? They're that information about a particular thing. And that's where really the guidance has been silent to date over what those attributes might be, because an attribute against a pump, for example, is very different to an attribute against a door. So when we start to think about attribute data, we don't just say complete the attribute tab of COBie. We need to think about how we define what those attributes might be. And that's where the matrix comes into play, really, because what it does is it helps you look at 2 levels. It helps you look at a systems level. This is tied in with Uniclass, so it helps you look at a systems level, and it helps you look at a product level to start thinking about what those attributes might be. So we might want to collect the flow rate of a pump, or we might want to collect the fire resistance of a door. The next thing that we get assistance with through the project is looking at product data tables. Now, there are 2 sides, well, three parts to the equation, really. There's the determining what data you want, what attribute data you want. There's then thinking about how that's going to be collected, and there's then thinking about how that's going to be provided. Now, if you start off with a clear understanding of attribute data at the beginning, then you can structure models, you can structure parameters against model components to collect that attribute data. And also we know that suppliers are starting to develop their own model components that will hold a degree of data about them. But sometimes we might have to use product data templates to collect that structured data in a way that's meaningful to design and construction teams. If you give design and construction teams COBie and say, go away and populate this and I want these attributes, at some point it's going to flow down the supply chain and somebody's going to think, this is too hard, I can't do this. So we need to think about how we present the collection in a logical way, and product data templates are a way of doing that. So they help the information provider collect the data. Now the fourth recommendation, which is complete common sense, is collect the data and the documents as the products and systems are purchased. Now I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but in the UK we've got into the habit of designing, constructing and getting towards the end of construction and gathering all of this stuff together to put into health and safety and operation and maintenance manuals. But common sense tells us actually it's much easier if we deal with that as a project progresses. So what we can start to do, if we're going to collect this data as components and systems are installed, we can prepare for that and get manufacturers involved in the completion of product data tables, so we've actually got the completed project data sheets. Now the process is really set the requirements, work out how you're going to collect the data, check that the data is there and deliver it. Now the check is important because if we're just giving over a load of stuff that is inaccurate, it's no good to anybody. So we need to look at how we check that the data that we ask for is provided and that data that is provided is correct and complete. And that's a project that Nick is working on with buildingSMART at the minute. And then we need to look at how we get all of the data from the product data sheets back into models. And that's where systems like we have in the UK and it's a European organisation, that's where systems like CoBuilder come into play, because they'll help us get data from a product data template into a model, which will then help us kick it out again into the structured COBie format. And we can intelligently manage our assets. So when we look at this matrix, it will give you recommended criteria around certain products and systems. And this has been developed from intensive research that's been led by Nick and the team. So this is not just his idea, it's considered research. And it's there to start clients and delivery teams thinking. It's linked in with Uniclass 2015. And also IFC, but what I would say is that this is not a definitive list and this is not our direction. This is, we'll give you something to think about. So one of the final recommendations is that this is a starting point for clients and teams, but it needs to be thought about in the context of a specific project. Now, what we've also done is started to think about when we're thinking about data that we're going to collect around products and systems, it's worthwhile thinking about the criticality and vulnerability of either that product or of that system, because some things are incredibly critical, and we've had the discussion around how foundations, if they fail, that's an issue. But actually, what's the chance of them failing? It's very small. So if we look at criticality and vulnerability in partnership, then it gives you the ability to make a judgment call over whether that data is going to be useful to you or not. So just to sum up, it's not definitive. It's been broken down and classified in different ways, the data that's provided through the matrix. And just because an item might be listed on the matrix, it doesn't mean you should go and collect data about it. It still comes down to a conscious decision around what is relevant to my particular project, my particular asset, or the purpose. So what I would ask you to do is, when you get 5 minutes, is to go onto the UK BIM Alliance website, to take that resources link and to have a look at the matrix and the guidance. And this is what I would say as well is this is a project that has been launched, but with like everything at the moment, we're all working hard to make things better. So if you have any good ideas or feedback, then please don't hesitate to send them through. There'll be contact details against that page. And whilst you're at it, if you're interested and you're interested in the security project, please have a look at that as well, and it takes you through the process of determining whether your project has any sensitive or security issues that you might want to consider. That is really important when we start to look at the provision of data, making sure that you aggregate or consolidate data appropriately. So it's very short and sweet. I don't want to eat into too much of the rest of the day. Hope that's been a useful, quick summary, and thank you very much for your time.
So any questions for Sarah? Is it on? Yeah. Just on the data requirements, is that linked? So like the MBS? Obviously.
So it's linked through to Uniclass, and it's linked through to IFC, and I'm not entirely sure if Uniclass is linked back to MBS.
They've put their Uniclass in.
Right. Okay.
I'm not
So.
happy what they're doing, because they've tried to list every object in the world.
Yeah.
Levels of detail.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. Do you see them as comparable standards, or?
I think really we should be trying to work to a consistent, certainly in the UK, around UK standards, we should be trying to work to some degree of consistency across the, because we get into other systems as well around for operation and for operation and maintenance, and there needs to be some consistency and relationship built with all of these different standards, so that you can use the one that you're familiar with or that you know, but it will translate for other organisations as well. So I'm not particularly answering your question, because I'm not saying categorically whether it does or it doesn't, but what I'm saying is that there should be a relationship between these different classification systems or ways of defining requirements.
I think even internationally we know that the world isn't going to change until the clients mandate it. And I tried to show a slide this morning, far more clumsily than you, that said that what we're providing at buildingSMART International is the vehicle for giving the clients the data that they require.
I think from looking at it from a client side, I said right at the very beginning that actually many clients are not in the habit of construction. It's not their day-to-day activity, and can be quite disruptive. So giving clients all the tools and capability and assistance that we can is really important, so that they can then turn that back into clarity of requirement.
Final question for Sarah. Thank you very much. And you're not staying around now, are you? So there's no questions for you at lunchtime. So if you need to get hold of her, look at the site. Thank you, Sarah.